I'm Roger Wright, and welcome to another episode of Glory on Grandview, Tales of Grizzly Football. Today we've got a special one for you. A chill is in the air. It's October. The leaves are starting to change. And at the end of the month, Ohio State will take on Penn State. And I thought, what a great time to bring in my guest today. It's special for two reasons. Number one, we have one of the most legendary athletes in Wadsworth school history, Bobby Jones. And number two, because it makes it special because I've been around to watch a lot of these great moments of greatness on Grandview and other venues of Grizzly athletics. So, Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
To Grizzly, Glory on Grandview. And we'll start right away and we'll talk. You know, your story, really, your football story begins with your dad and your family.
Right, yep.
And your dad, Ron Jones, head coach, Grizzly head coach, Ron Jones. And you had two older brothers that were pretty tough football players. Ron ended up playing at Dayton, and then Mike at Villanova. So talk a little bit about that, growing up the early years with football in Wadsworth.
Yeah, I was just always around it. You know, I wanted to play pee-wees, and I wanted to be like my brothers and be like my dad, you know, and I was always around. So I was a lot younger than my brothers. So 8 and 9 year difference between the three of us. And, of course, me being the youngest and my dad being the coach and always wanting to be there. So I was at every practice, you know, every game, just watching, and that was my inspiration. You know, I wanted to be like those guys, you know, and just growing up around football, that's all you knew. I mean, it was football, and that's just the way life was for us, you know. And my dad, you know, coached at Coventry, then Barberton, then Copley, then Wadsworth. So he kind of had a career going all over the place, and ended up in Wadsworth, and we moved here, and this is where we stuck. And so I had aspirations to be like my brothers and go to college and play football, you know. And then every goal of a kid is to play in the NFL, you know. So,
and talk a little bit more about your dad. You know, we both know him and love him. You know, great mentor to me and somebody I have a lot of respect for. And when I came to Wadsworth, got to coach with him. But I laugh because he is as old school gets when it comes to coaches, and just one of those tough old coaches. But I remember you being around there as a kid. And he was also a great dad. He was patient with you. He was, you know, you were always around. And so talk a little bit about that and what you got from him a little bit.
I think he was patient with me because he was just done with Mel, the two brothers. So, you know, after those two came along, because they were only 13 months apart, so they were like a tornado running around, you know, everywhere. But no, he was a great influence for me. He was just a great dad, always there. He didn't have a dad growing up, so he was learning, you know, and I think he had it figured out by the time he got to me. So he's just been a great inspiration. He was always so positive, always encouraging, and he never let us get away with anything, you know. So he held us accountable for every movement and every action we had, and he's like, look, if you want to make it, it's on you. Like, you have to do it. And he was very good about, you know, because he did coach me for a short bit, and he was very good about leaving coaching and being a dad at home. And he always, you know, on the ride home, it was kind of a mix of both. But, you know, once we got home, the coaching thing got turned off, and he was dad, you know. So he did a great job of, you know, keeping those two separate at home and at practice. And, you know, practice, he was intense. I mean, he never let you get away with anything. I mean, he would never let you slip, and you know that, coaching for him. And it was one of those things where, you know, if you screwed up, do it again. And you know, if you couldn't get it right, it wasn't fun. You know, right. So he was on you pretty good.
Right.
So.
Well, we showed some pictures here, and you could see kind of how you grew. And I remember you were kind of short and wide when you were little, and then all of a sudden you hit a growth spurt, and you got big. And by your sophomore year, I knew we had a great player when we were I was coaching the offensive line, and nobody wanted to hold the bag when you were lining up the block there. Guys would kind of walk in the back, but you got big and you started playing. And I think originally you were a guard your sophomore year, and played some linebacker for us, and then you ended up on the 1996 team that was undefeated, and that was the first team since the late 60s that went 10-0.
Went 10-0.
Great team there, and. So talk a little bit about that, those years as a Wadsworth Grizzly and the Glory on Grandview.
It was just fun. I mean, you know, I had a very unique high school football experience. I didn't play all 4 years, you know. So my freshman year, I started to hit that growth spurt. I broke my back, so I didn't really get to play in my freshman year at all. And that's a funny story for another time. But then my sophomore year, I started at guard, and then halfway through the season, I ended up starting at middle linebacker and finishing there. And then my junior year, I blew my knee out and missed that season as well. I played one game against Cloverleaf, and then during practicing, I forget who we were getting ready for, but I blew my knee out, and that was the end of that season. So, and then my senior year, we were 3-7 my sophomore year. We were 3-7 my junior year. And then, we had a great group of leaders that in my class, and we decided, look, we'd have team meetings before school, and look, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to hold each other accountable. And I remember the leaders getting in underclassmen's faces, like, listen, we're not putting up with this, and that's kind of how I was raised. And if we saw people doing a campus run and they took a shortcut, we called them out on it, and they'd get mad at us and whatever. But eventually, it all worked out, and we had a great quarterback. Rob Sondels was great. He was a tremendous athlete. Him and I were great buddies. Dan Herbert in the backfield, and fast and quick and nimble, and that combination. And I wasn't a receiving tight end, but I was more of a blocker. And we could just open the holes up for Dan, and our offensive line was just fantastic. And I can't remember all of them; they'll rattle them all off. But like Ricky Wheatley was up there. I remember him, and Greg Hartley was up there. And those are just some tough-nosed kids that would come to play, and then our defense was just relentless, and we would always pursue the ball, and we just all stuck together. One heartbeat was my dad's motto, and that's kind of stuck, and we all just, were there for each other and rallied, and I ended up going, 10-0, making the playoffs. And I remember that first game, we played Solon in the playoffs, and I don't think we were ready for that speed, man, because they came out, they were so fast. But yeah, it was a fun senior season.
It was a great senior year. So you hurt your knee your junior year. Let's go back. Yeah. And you made some kind of miraculous recovery because you wrestled then for the state title your junior year in wrestling. You came all the way back and you won your first state title. So, how did that happen? I mean, you had knee surgery, and then you came back, and by the end of the wrestling season, you were winning a state title.
Yeah, that was unreal. I mean, being injured prior to that, I broke my back. My sophomore year, I think I dislocated both my thumbs. So I kind of knew the adversity I'd have to go through, and then that was a whole different thing. Blowing your knee out and having surgery on that and going through that rehab, missing the season, not sure what the unknown of what your future is going to look like. And I remember I was just itching to get back, and the doctor gave me some encouraging words like, look, this is not going to take super long. It's going to set you back a few months. Your leg's going to atrophy, and here's the work you have to do to get back. And I listened to the doctor, and for those kids out there who get hurt, my son's going through it now, with an ACL, who get hurt, it's not the end. I mean, you have goals, you have aspirations that you want to achieve, and mine was to be a state champ in wrestling. And I remember the day that doctor released me to start running. Yeah, there it is. The day the doctor released me to start running, I remember I went home and started running immediately just to get myself back in shape. And I remember my first match back was at Norton, and I was so amped up, and I was not in wrestling shape at all. And I went out there guns a-blazing, and I won the match, but I came off the match and I was so tired because I was so out of shape. I haven't competed no football, no wrestling till halfway through, and just kept my head down and kept working and kept praying. I was a big believer in Christ, and I believe he was, he got me through a lot of things in my life, and that was one of the things that I relied on was my faith, and I just kept believing in him, and he believed in me, and I just kept working, and then I got to the state tournament, and I remember that finals match, I was actually losing, and I think what gave me the confidence was, the Brakeman report that they put out there about, the rankings. Yeah, well, it came out and said I was going to take third, and I was like, hold on a minute, I never wrestled varsity, but I wrestled varsity my sophomore year, but third as a heavyweight, that kind of gave me some confidence that people believed in me, and I was like, wow, okay, I have a shot at this thing. So, I went down to the state tournament and just started winning the matches and we get into the finals, and it was like surreal. It was like kind of like an out-of-body experience. Like, wow, I walk out of the tunnel, and when the heavyweights are there, usually there's no one left in the stands, right? But there were people still there, watching. It was even the following year was even more. But anyway, so I was losing with 40 seconds left, and I was down 3-4 or 7-4, and we went out of bounds right by Coach G, and he grabbed my my headgear and whispered a few things that I can't repeat on camera, and he reminded me of all the hard work I put in to get to this moment, and I went out there and somehow I got this kid from St. Ed's, Jeremy Orski, in some funky cradle and ended up pinning him right in front of their coaches, and that was that, and got up, and it was just like, wow, I mean, everything goes numb, and you just can't even explain the feeling. It was so euphoric, you know, but that was a really cool experience.
Yeah, it was fun to watch, and I do remember that, just the arena exploding. A lot of people were rooting against St. Ed's and rooting for Wadsworth. It was really cool. So. Yeah,
it was fun.
And then it didn't end. Your Grizzly athletics went into track, and you were a great track athlete. Shot and dish. There's a good picture of you throwing there. Same. There was a repeat scenario. I remember Suburban League meet. Remember your senior year? Yeah. You were down to your last throw. Copley had a great athlete. Lloyd Garden was another shot putter, and Lloyd had put his best throw out there, and you had one throw left to beat him. And I'll never forget that. You launched out, you corked one off, and you beat him on your last throw.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was neat. So, all right, but let's move on to Penn State. So, you know, the recruiting process was happening. People saw you won the state in wrestling as a junior, and you started getting recruited. And it was kind of cool the day we had Joe Paterno. I'll never forget that. Legendary Penn State coach was at Wadsworth High School, walking halls there. But you had a lot of schools after you, but you chose Penn State, and why? What brought you to Penn State?
It just had that home environment that I just felt like I fit in there. You know, I felt like I belonged there. You know, I was being recruited by Ohio State as well, and we went down there for a visit, and it just didn't fit. Something there just seemed off to me. I'm not, no disrespect to Ohio State. I mean, they got a great program, but it just, to me, you know, John Cooper was there with some other staff, and they kind of said some things to me that didn't really settle well, and it was just, I won't repeat those, but it was just kind of one of those things where it's like, hey, you're an Ohio boy, what are you doing going to Penn State? You know, like, why are you going to visit there? And, you know, so I'm like, to my parents, I'm like, I got to think about this one, you know. So I went to Penn State the next day and did the campus tour, and the coaches, they were so good, and they were so, just the way they talked and the way they made you feel at home. And, you know, Paterno, I mean, he's one of the best coaches ever. I mean, you can't disagree with his record and how his recruiting and linebacker you and just what he had going on there. And I remember them saying before I left, they go, listen, we'd love to have you here. We think you fit in great. But if this isn't for you, we'll help you get in somewhere else. You know, and that really hit home with me. And I'm like, this is where I want to go. This is where I belong. And they were right. I mean, they fit right in, and it was a great experience all the way around.
Yeah. So playing at Penn State, you rose through the ranks quick. I remember, I think you redshirted maybe your first year, but then by the second year you were rotating in a defensive line, and then, you know, you started out as a defensive tackle. They moved you to end, and you eventually became a team captain. What was that like, being a team captain at Penn State?
You know, you had to earn that. So they didn't really announce the team captain until after the season was over. Joe would select certain this is my senior year I'm talking now. So he would select, you know, certain people, certain seniors who had good leadership qualities and they usually picked the home state wherever you were from. So if you played Ohio State, of course, I'd be the captain for the Ohio State game. If it was, you know, somewhere in Pittsburgh or, you know, Pennsylvania, it'd be one of the guys from Pennsylvania would be a captain. So over the state you played in, if we had a player from that team, from that state, they would be the captain for that. And then at the end of the season, the players would vote to who would be the captain, and myself and John Gilmore, one of my teammates, and I were both named captains, and that was quite an honor, you know, coming from, you know, to be a captain for Joe Paterno. So it was neat, yeah. So
knowing you weren't content with just playing football at Penn State. So you got a crazy idea, and you asked Joe Paterno, hey, would you mind if I was on the Penn State wrestling team?
You're right.
So talk about that. What were you thinking there?
Well, you know, coming out of high school, I was getting recruited to wrestle, but I committed early to play football, so that kind of ended. So I'm at Penn State my freshman year, and the coaches approached me, the wrestling coaches, and like, hey, ask Paterno if you can wrestle for us. So I did, and of course he says no. He's like, you're here to play football, you're on scholarship. And so my redshirt freshman comes my second year, and I asked the coaches, you know, the wrestling coaches, ask him again. So I asked him again, and then he says no. So my third year, redshirt sophomore year, I asked coach, same song and dance. He's like, nope, not yet, you know. So then my redshirt junior year, which was my fourth year, I asked him, and he's like, go ahead. You know, and I was like, kind of taken back by it. The season's halfway over through wrestling. It's already halfway over, and I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah, let's see what you got. You're established here. Let's go ahead and call the coaches and let's see what you can do. And I remember that. As soon as I got out of his office, I called the wrestling coaches and said, hey, Paterno said I can wrestle. And they're like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no. They're like, practice is in 2 hours. Be here. And I'm like, okay. So I show up to practice, and I haven't been on a mat since high school. And they're like, you're going to wrestle off tonight. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm like, man, I hope this comes. And I was so nervous. I'm like, man, I hope this comes back to me quick. So I wrestled off, and I ended up beating him out that night. And I was wrestling varsity day 2 against Pitt. And I remember calling my parents, and they were like what? I'm wrestling varsity tomorrow, and they're like, we're going to be there, and so they show up, and of course I go out, and wrestling is one of those sports that kind of stuck with me. I didn't really. It's like riding a bike for me. I kind of just muscle memory always stuck there, and so I won that match in double overtime. And I remember the coaches. Every athlete had to do some sprints after their match, and they're like, Jones, go get your sprints. And I'm like, I got it. And I walked around the corner and collapsed and put my feet up on the wall. I didn't move till the bus took us back, But that was quite the experience.
So you got to wrestle in for a season?
I wrestled one season, and then I was invited after my senior year to go to an all-star game for football. And I had no aspirations to play in the NFL after that point. I felt my career was done. I got what I wanted to get out of football, and there was my roommate down there at the All-Star. It was the Hula Bowl. I don't know why. And he's like, you can play, man. Like, I'm telling you. So he's like, talk to my agent. And long story short, and so we started talking. And he's like, you'll regret it if you don't do it. So he talked me into it. And I forewent my wrestling season my senior year and started getting ready for the NFL. And that's kind of where things led.
So before we leave that, being at Penn State, and you were there for Joe Paterno's big win when he set the record.
Oh,
There's a picture of it right there.
Yeah, right there. Oh, man, that was something. We were down big time. I mean, I don't even
against Ohio State, right? It was a big comeback.
That was Ohio State. We were down. I think Penn State or Ohio State was beating us 24 to like 3 or 6 at halftime, and there was no shot for us to win. Everyone was counting us out, but we fought back and we won. And that game actually. Joe Paterno passed Bear Bryant's all-time winning record during that game. And I was standing on the sidelines. I wasn't thinking anything of it. And Jay Paterno, Joe's son, was like, go carry my dad off the field. So I ran out there and hoisted Joe up on my shoulders and marched him off the field, and everyone surrounded it. And, there it is. I mean, that was quite a moment. So something I'll never forget. And that poster's hanging up in my son's bedroom right above his bed, and he wants to go there and follow Dad's footsteps. So pretty neat, yeah. Well,
Beaver Stadium's a crazy place to play. We mentioned the Ohio State-Penn State game this year. It's going to be the night before Halloween.
Right.
Going to be a great atmosphere. That one's in Columbus, but when it's been in Penn State, I mean, what an atmosphere. I mean, the whiteouts.
It's unreal.
It's crazy. I mean, that stadium just seems to shake. It's loud on television.
It's loud.
When you hear it on TV. Yeah. So, playing there. And there's a picture of a book that was out on the letters from captains, and you got to write a letter to Joe Paterno there thanking him for the influence he had on your life. Right. So it's kind of a neat honor that captains have. But let's move on. You talked about the NFL, so you tried out with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you didn't make it there. You got cut there. You were long snapping, and you ended up with the New York Giants. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was a cool experience. So, we're waiting on, it's draft day, and I had a couple of teams, coming at me, and the Redskins were one, the Steelers were one, the Ravens were one, and a few other teams were getting ready to make so like, stay by your phone. We'll make the call when we're ready to take you. And so I had 2 calls, and I decided to go with Pittsburgh. I just felt like that's where I needed to go. But when I made it to the very end, I made it to the very last cut before the last preseason game, and I remember Bill Cowher personally calling me into his office, and he had like a 15-minute conversation with me. It was really neat. Most coaches say, yeah, you bring your playbook, see you later. But we sat down for like 15 minutes and had a nice talk, and he's like, look, you got great qualities. You're a hard worker. He's like, you'll be on the team tomorrow. I'll make some phone calls for you. It's just not going to work out with us. I'm like, okay. And he did. And I remember going home, and after the Steelers, I was home for one day. I was playing a round of golf by myself. I don't know why. I just felt like golfing. I'm not even a golfer, but it just felt right to me. And New York called and said, hey, get on the plane. You're in. You're our starter right away. And we played against the last preseason game with the Giants was the Baltimore Ravens, and we played that game, and I was on the rosters, and that was it. So it was pretty cool.
So you had to snap for a while then in the NFL, and as we know, man, it's a tough league, right?
It's a tough league.
So you had a bad snap, and then they were like, okay, we're going to try somebody else, and that's how it is in the NFL.
Cutthroat. Yeah, it was.
But you had that experience, but then you kind of moved away and you got on with the real life, the normal life, right? You were teacher, you got into education, and you did some coaching and some weight training advisory and did some things like that. We got to be at the middle school for a little bit together, and that was a lot of fun. But then you decided to take another turn, and you got into some business ventures and got out of education and into those. But you always had that great energy. So I'd keep up with you, and you'd tell me crazy things like what you were doing, like fitness and training and that sort of thing. So maybe talk a little bit about that, and before that even your family, because at the same time your family was growing. You had your high school sweetheart, Krista, who was a great athlete herself, on a member of the state championship basketball team. But talk a little bit about that, because your family, there's a picture there, and your family grew at that time as well.
Yeah, I've always wanted to compete. I loved it, pro sports. Once you get a taste of the pros, and you just love it, right? So it was just one of those things, and wrestling kind of was always my passion. So I started to get into some grappling. I told my wife I wanted to, be a cage fighter, and she's like, "You're out of your mind. There's no way you're doing this." And I'm like, well, how about, and ironically, like that same week, I ran into someone who does grappling, and it was like grappling tournaments, no striking, just, tap outs and things like that. And I talked her into, she's like, yeah, you can do that. That's fine. Go ahead. So I started doing that, and I was winning these tournaments, and I never had any official training in jiu-jitsu prior to some of these tournaments. I learned some of my moves by playing Xbox or PlayStation and watching the UFC, what they did. And I'm like, I think I can do that. So I'd go on the mat and try it, and it would work. And I started winning these tournaments, and I'm like, Krista, I got to step it up. Like, I got to go fight, and that was a whole nother issue. But she ended up letting me do it, and I fought some professional fights, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And then, from doing that, from, just crazy challenges, like we have a bike ride we would do out in PA, and some of my buddies were like, when I was getting to know them, they didn't know me yet, but I'm like, hey, we got this cabin out in PA, there it is, and that's 155 miles from my house. What do you say we jump on our bikes one morning at like 5:15 to see if we can make it? And my dad was like, you're nuts. There's no way you're going to make it. I mean, how are you even going to get there? I'm like, I don't know. We'll figure it out, So I decided to do that, and we made it. And then there's a marathon there. My wife did a marathon, and I told her she's crazy for training. And she's like, you can't run a marathon without training. You know how hard that is? And I'm like, listen. So I signed up for one and just went and ran it, and that was hard. I mean, people talk about the wall at mile 22, and that's for real. I hit that wall, and gosh dang, but I said I can't. I did it. I made it. I barely made it. 5 hours and 20 whatever minutes later, I finished, but I made it. So I always like just to push myself and try new things physically, and I'm paying for it now. So, but yeah.
I imagine when Krista said you're crazy, that wasn't the first time or only time she ever told you were crazy for these ideas that you come up with. And you shared with me the funny story. After the marathon, you forgot you were supposed to teach a spinning class, I think, the next day.
Oh, jeez,
and you got up after running a marathon without training for it and taught the spinning class.
And taught the class, yes, that's correct. Yeah. I don't think I sat down on the bike that time, but, yeah.
All right. Well, in all these things, Bob, it's funny. I mean, you obviously have something that drives you, and you've always had it. The resounding themes. You're behind in the wrestling state tournament. You come back, you pin the kid. And I saw you in that tournament. There were other times. I remember the kid from that played football at Indiana, Tony. He had you on your back. I thought you were pinned. I looked up. By the time I see if you could fight it out, or by the time I look back, you pinned him.
Yeah.
It's like you always had that last shot put. There was always another gear. And what do you attribute that to? You're one of those amazing people that, like I say, during a course of a lifetime, some people just have something, the heart of a champion, whatever it is. Where does that come from with you?
I think because, looking back, I had a rough childhood. I wasn't the most athletic kid. I was always just that little frumpy kid that was picked last in gym class, and I felt like I always had something to prove. I don't know, and that just brought it out of me. Like I just wanted to prove everyone wrong that, look, I can do this, and people would say you can't do this, and I would always tell people your limits are my limits. Like, your mind's such a strong thing, and you can do pretty amazing things what you set your mind to, and I think, my dad always said, look, when you think you're ready to quit, that guy's ready to quit too. So you just got to push past that and, beat him, get past that point. And that kind of always drove me, you know. And there was times when I would struggle, and I remember one time I was in third grade, I was struggling, and my mom said something to me. I'll probably get emotional talking about this, but you know, she's like, you think you feel bad and you think you had a rough, man. Think how Jesus Christ fell on that cross when he was getting, you know, made fun of and beat and tortured going up to Calvary. And that kind of always stuck with me, you know, and that was kind of like my drive that kind of got me through a lot of things. So,
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned your mom, too, because we had some pictures of your mom there. Just a wonderful lady, strong, you know, just like your dad. Just two strong parents, great people, and always at your games, always, you know, just supporting both of them, supporting you, but just a wonderful mom as well. So, and I know you're telling the exact truth because I got to witness a lot of that and see that family and the support that you had. So, well, you and I could talk forever.
Oh my gosh, you could tell so many stories. It's unreal.
Yeah, and we'll continue the conversation. But what a great thing to be able to sit down together and thank you, my friend, for letting me share your story and sharing your story with us here on Glory on Grandview. And I would like to thank our friend Felicity Wilson, photographer. She took a nice promo pic of you and I today to promote the show. So Felicity Wilson, thank you. And also to our seniors at the Wadsworth High School Four Cities Compact Media Program that help us with the show, and our friends at WCTV, Joanna and John Bernard. Thank all of you. And I just invite our audience to join me next time on Glory on Grandview, Tales of Grizzly Football. Thank you.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.